Good afternoon. Welcome to Kunsang Payal Choling. We're so glad to have you here with us today. Jetsunma's teaching is from 1989. Can you believe it? And the title is Entering the Bodhisattva Path. And so we'll begin.
What I'd like to talk about today is entering and functioning on the path of the Bodhisattva. Now, the path of the Bodhisattva is something that, and the idea of the Bodhisattva is something that is actually based on the concept of compassion. And in the Buddha's teachings, the philosophy of compassion, the practice of compassion, particularly in the Mahayana and Vajrayana vehicles which are practiced here, are foundational. Without the idea of compassion, without the idea of loving kindness, without the idea of practicing as a bodhisattva, it is considered that there is truly no path. The term bodhisattva actually means one who is awakening. A being who is awakening, someone who is awakening. A Buddha is considered to be one who has achieved the perfect awakening, the full awakening. So the path of the Bodhisattva is a path that one engages in order to realize the precious awakened state. And so we must ask ourselves now, awakened to what? It isn't simply a loose term that one throws around. It means something quite specific. It means awakened to one's own primordial wisdom nature. Awakened to that nature which is free of contrivance, free of delusion, free of defilement, free of confusion, that nature which is clear, luminous, innately wakeful, and which is our own natural, uncontrived state or view. One who wishes to practice the path to pure awakening must also consider the teachings about compassion. These teachings, or this practice of compassion, this idea of compassion, is called bodhicitta. It is considered that when one achieves the precious awakening and actually becomes a fully realized Buddha, one then experiences in an uncontrived, unlimited, and spontaneous way one's true nature. Often this kind of terminology is misunderstood, unfortunately, especially in this day and age when there is a great deal of talk about spirituality and a great deal of availability of many different kinds of philosophy. So I'd like to take a moment then to clarify that. It is popular today to think that a person, and I speak of an individual just as we understand individuals to be, you and I, like that, to be liberated or enlightened or free in some way, if we are, let's say, insightful about ourselves, or if we are somehow in a state of perhaps emotional harmony. If we feel uninhibited, if we feel spontaneous, if we feel creative, if our lives are purposeful, if we are free of a great deal of self-doubt. It has even become popular to think that perhaps we are in that state of realizing our own nature, or in some kind of liberated state, if we have certain kinds of experiences. Those experiences might be experiences that one has in prayer, or experiences such as visions or dreams or things like that. According to the Buddha's teaching, however, the experience of enlightenment is actually quite different from that. One realizes, actually, the emptiness of self-nature. One realizes that the contrived, limited, individual view, that is the view of self that we hold when we call ourselves by name, or try to describe ourselves or our experiences in any particular way. That limited view is actually a delusion. That this particular view, no matter how vast it is, so I have to say that this view is considered a delusion, whether it is a very negative, contracted, small view that one might have of oneself, such as a view of insignificance or insecurity, that kind of thing, or a bad image. Or whether that view is that one thinks of oneself as a very advanced being, or a great being, or a being that has some kind of super consciousness, that kind of thing. According to the Buddha's teachings, both of those views are actually delusions, because, according to the Buddha, one's nature is not that. One's nature is free of any conceptualization, whether it is small conceptualization or great conceptualization, whether it is little or big, or whether it is pleasing or not pleasing. That one's nature is considered to be empty of all such discrimination, empty of all such actually defilement, empty of all such conceptualization. One's nature is considered to be clear, pure, spontaneously arising, spontaneously liberating. And what does that mean? That means not stuck on conceptualization, not fixed and rigid as our perception tends to be when we become nailed onto the image of self. One's nature is innately wakeful. That means to say, what is meant by that is this, that while one might say one's nature is empty of the confinement and the discrimination associated with ego or individuality, one's nature isn't empty as we understand empty. It isn't black and cold and void. It isn't like that. It is innately wakeful, and that term innate wakefulness actually implies awareness, but it implies a non-specific awareness. An awareness that is not limited by subject and object. It implies an awareness that is like the analogy of the sun is perfect. In the same way as one's nature is considered to be luminous and innately wakeful, and in the same way that the sun is luminous, the sun's natural characteristic, because of its luminosity, tends to be that it radiates this luminosity in all directions, and yet it does not think, I'm radiating here. or I'm radiating specifically to this place, or I'm going to shine on Washington, D.C. and not on North Carolina, or I'm going to shine on roses and not violets. That isn't the nature of the sun to function in that way. In the same way, one's own nature is like that. Our nature is luminous, it is innately wakeful, and it has that non-discriminating awareness, an awareness that is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient as well. An awareness that has the capacity, actually, to function within the three times, past, present, and future. Yet that awareness is still different from the intelligence that we have, which is based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Our intelligence, our awareness, presupposes the ego, presupposes the idea that self is solid and real and truly a factor. Due to that presupposition, all phenomena is always and consistently experienced as other. Actually, the five senses are an extension of one's ego. Everything that the five senses experience, no matter what it is experienced in relation to self. All perception then is relative. One perceives the size of any object because in relative to the size of oneself. That is the only meaning that the size of an object can have. The hardness or softness of an object is perceived relative to the hardness or softness of one's own impression of self. The how and the where of something is experienced relative to self. The hot or the cold of it, the impression of any kind that one has, it's considered to be relative to self. And so these five senses then are an extension of that ego. We then experience phenomena as solid due to the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, due to the belief in self-nature as being solid. Every experience that we have is contrived from data that we have experienced due to these five senses, or through these five senses, and therefore due to the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Every single experience, therefore, whether it is the gross and obvious phenomena that surrounds us, solid form, distance, time and space, these gross things, or actually whether it is our own inner phenomena, even that is contrived according to the perception that compares self to other. Any conclusions that we have come to, any conclusions whatsoever, including the conclusions that we have come to about the world's acceptance of us, including the conclusions that we have come to about our own image, and even this, including the conclusions that we have come to about our own most subtle inner experiences. They have all come to us through the five senses. How difficult it is then for us to hear when we hear finally that the five senses are actually based on some primal delusion, and that they are then a deluded process. According to the Buddha then, true awakening, true enlightenment comes about when one pacifies this entire process. When one pacifies all of the tools, all of the supports, all of the conclusions, all of the cause and effect relationships, which, by the way, we have been involved in since time out of mind, that are a result of these conclusions. That that we have been involved in since long before this life. And the Buddha teaches us that these causes, these things that we do, these cause and effect relationships, can only be pacified, can only be brought to cessation when one realizes, finally, in a stable and lasting way, through one's practice, the emptiness of self-nature. One will then experience the awakening to that precious primordial wisdom state, to that pure luminosity. When we enter onto the path of the Bodhisattva, or the awakening one, first of all, we should think that, according to the teachings, it is considered that there are at least 10 levels. And I think that we can safely say that there are sub-levels and different meanings within these levels. But that there are 10 levels within the Bodhisattva path. When one first enters onto the Bodhisattva path, something specific happens. First of all, you should not think that because you have decided to live a spiritual life that automatically you are on the Bodhisattva path. There is something specific that is done at that time. In the Buddhist tradition, it is expressed, or it is traditionally accomplished in a certain way. One takes refuge in Bodhisattva vows. And the meaning of those Bodhisattva vows, the refuge vows, first of all, are that one realizes that the precious awakened state is the goal. One realizes that one's life is only useful if it is utilized as a vehicle to accomplish that precious awakening. One thinks to move in that direction, and one looks for teachings that have consistently and have predictably and constantly brought about the desired result. And so in the Buddhist tradition, then we take refuge in the Lhama, in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the Sangha. The Buddha being obvious, the Dharma being the teachings of the Buddha, and the Sangha being the community that perpetuates the teaching. And then we take the Bodhisattva vow, and the Bodhisattva vow is a vow in which one yearns to accomplish the pristine nature of undefiled love. One yearns to accomplish the pristine nature of compassion. This nature is consistent with the precious awakened state, is consistent actually with the nature of the Buddha. It is not something that can be composed. You cannot act like that. You cannot wear clothes that look like that. You cannot try to be like that. It is one's true nature revealed, and it is love. However, in the meantime, one must practice compassionate activity. And this compassionate activity is the means by which one begins to move toward that state of precious awakening. So the Bodhisattva vow, when one takes the Bodhisattva vow, one actually promises to dedicate whatever virtuous effort one can engage in to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. And it is considered that from the time of taking that vow, from that moment forward, you offer your life, this life, and every life yet to come, to be as food or drink for sentient beings. You offer this life and every life yet to come to be of supreme benefit to sentient beings, recognizing that sentient beings suffer and that they wander in cyclic existence, unable to accomplish the end to their suffering, we vow as well to return again and again and again, under any circumstances, no matter what they might be, in order to bring about the cessation of suffering for all sentient beings. It is a very, very important step. And at that point, one is automatically on the first level of being a bodhisattva. Unless, of course, one takes that vow and then forgets it, thinks of it as nothing, and leaves it alone. But if one sincerely and consistently practices, then most assuredly, one is on that first level. At that time, one is changed. There is a change that is felt if this vow is adhered to, that is moving and profound in a way that no other change one can engage in could ever be. Even if one were to take up meditation every day, even if one were to take up hours and hours of meditation every day, even if one were to have vast, wonderful spiritual experiences, it isn't the same as the change to the heart, to the core, that occurs when one enters into that precious bodhisattva vehicle. As one begins to practice the bodhisattva path, one practices, first of all, aspirational bodhicitta. And that is that one begins to become constantly mindful of how one might benefit sentient beings. One begins to make prayers that are meaningful for other sentient beings. One begins to notice the suffering of sentient beings, to be mindful of them, and one begins to cherish them, actually, more than one cherishes oneself. Why is that? Is it a self-hate trip? Are we going to become, oh, peril, insecure? Not at all. According to the Buddhist teaching, all sentient beings are equal. They are the same. They are the same taste, the same suchness, the same nature, whatever their perception might be. And in this room alone, there are more of you than there are of me. Therefore, if I understand that teaching, if I hold to that teaching, and if I keep my vow, it naturally comes, it naturally occurs that I care more for your well-being than I do for my own. It naturally occurs. If, on the other hand, I believed that my ego and myself were basically the center of the universe, and that I were somehow more magnificent than the rest of you, and that I were greater and stronger and somehow more omnipotent, if that were my real feeling, then perhaps I would think I were more important than you. But that isn't the teaching, and that isn't what we think. So we look to benefit sentient beings in any way. We begin to constantly be mindful and to utter prayers for them. Prayers such as this: if there is ever hunger, let me return as food. If there is ever a need for shade, let me return as a tree. If there is ever need for love, let me return as the arms that hold them. If there is ever the need for succor, let me return as their mother. If there is ever the need to cross over, let me return as a bridge. And these prayers are said till tears come to one's eyes. They are said not superficially, but with the full intention of carrying out that promise. Subtly, during that time, one begins to change. And one actually then begins to learn to accomplish practices, such as the generation of oneself as the deity, recitation of mantra, pujas and sadhana practice, the many highly virtuous and extremely condensed practices that lead us quickly toward purifying the five senses into the five celestial wisdoms, and into the five primordial wisdoms, and into purifying the gross view of self-nature as being inherently real into the primordial wisdom state. And as one accomplishes these practices, one then dedicates the virtue and the condensed merit of this practice to the benefit of sentient beings, offering the merit to them, not keeping it to oneself, but offering it to them. Now you say, well, if I give this merit away, then maybe I won't have any anymore. Or if I think that all I'm going to do is run around making prayers for other people, when do I have time for myself? How can I learn to love myself? Actually, we have an extremely distorted view about these things. You see, when one suffers, one doesn't suffer because one hasn't spent enough time on oneself. One doesn't suffer because one has been too generous. One does not suffer because one has thought about the welfare of beings. One does not suffer because one has a generous heart. One suffers because it is the karma of one's mind to suffer, and that suffering occurs due to self-absorption. That suffering occurs due to selfishness, due to the contraction into the rigidity and the holding on to and the cherishing and clinging to ego. These are the real reasons why one suffers. And actually, in practicing the Bodhisattva path, in which one makes these vows and lives with them, in which one consistently practices for the welfare of sentient beings, in which one attains the pure heart of generosity, that actually is the karma or the cause of happiness. So you can give away your good merit and your virtue left and right. And the funny thing about it is, the more you give, the more you have. Only entering onto the pure path of loving kindness, onto the pure path of the Bodhisattva, even that first taking of the vow, even those first baby steps to accomplish loving, even when you don't feel that you've really accomplished loving at all, even when you are 70% selfish and 30% trying, those first steps actually remove mountains and mountains of gross defilement. When I say defilement, I don't mean bad boyness or bad girlness. I mean those delusions, those mistaken ideas, those confused perceptions that cause us to be unable, even for a moment, to know our true nature. And as we continue to grow on the path of the Bodhisattva, as we continue to institute the practices of loving kindness, and as we eventually reach the ultimate loving kindness, which is the vow to, which is the full activation, or how can I say, practice and actualization of the vow to return and again in order to benefit sentient beings, the ultimate compassion. As we come to practice that compassion, we develop within our minds, due to the pacification of the fixation on self-nature as being inherently real, the ability to perceive that nature to some extent, the spaciousness within our minds to not act in an erotic and compulsive way, to not be totally and constantly fixated on the rigidity associated with ego and the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. And at that point, true bliss, not ordinary human happiness that comes and goes, but true bliss, the kind that in the precious awakening we will all abide in, is born. And so this path has a very specific technology to it. It isn't something that one can think about and just become excited about and try to act like. It has a specific technology. But the result is fantastic. It isn't limited to the experience of being successful as a human being or being happy in the ordinary sense. It isn't limited to the experience of being powerful or being great. It isn't limited to any experience that we can name. The bliss of experiencing the perfect union of emptiness and compassion is so far beyond any experience that we can describe, and so precious that it behooves us to apply in a diligent and concise way the proper and appropriate technology in order to accomplish it. But even more than that, most of all, it is important to love. Because if we are concentrating on our own enlightenment, wanting to achieve that bliss, wanting to achieve that precious awakening, we will in subtle ways exclude others. We will in subtle ways forget that their enlightenment, because there are many of them, is more important than our own. We will forget that there are many of our motherly sentient beings, those who have been our own kind mothers, who have no real connection with the precious path of Dharma and no way to accomplish their practice. We will forget that in the 6 realms of cyclic existence, in the form and formless realms, in all the realms inconceivable with sentient beings as many as infinite space, there are beings whose only connection with enlightenment at this time is you. That you are the only karma that they have that connects them to such a path. And so you should pray for these ones especially every day. These are the ones that we call those who have hopes of us. And it is for these that we practice. It is for these that we continue, even when it's hard, even when it's a lot of work, even when it challenges us. It is truly for these that we practice the path of loving kindness. So I hope that this teaching has been of some benefit to you, and I hope certainly that you will hold it in your mind and you will consider it and think about it. And if it causes you to practice more and better and with greater love, then it's useful. If not, it isn't that useful. So I hope that you will utilize it in that way. And thank you very much for coming, truly.
Thank you very much for joining with us today and for listening to this teaching, which I hope was helpful to you. It was certainly helpful to me. So there we go. And always happy to be sharing these. These teachings of Jetsunmas we share on every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And Also on the 2nd and the 5th Wednesdays of each month. That's once or twice a month, depending on if there's 5 Wednesdays. The reason it's so bizarre is that it is interconnected with, I guess. It's in between the teachings that Khenpo Tenzin Karze gives. And Khenpo Tenzin Karze is our resident Khenpo now. And he teaches every Wednesday, the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Wednesdays. The Khenpo's teachings at 7:30. They're both at the same time. But Khenpo's teachings are on Zoom, and they require registration, where Jetsunma's teachings are on YouTube, and they do not. So, that's the, well, that's not the only difference. There are different people. We could go down a road on that, but we won't. So Khenpo teaches the basic teachings of Buddhism. A lot of those come directly from the afterwards, and he's giving basically what is the Buddhist philosophy of life, and how can you practice it. So if you're interested in those, you can go to tara.org. That's in the chat right now, and look for Khenpo Tenzin Karze, and you find him. He's in under, I think, pray, study, meditate with us, and you go to the study part, and there he is. So that's one way. Another way, is to just go on the front. If you're on a phone, phones are hard for websites that are big, and you just scroll down to the bottom of the front page, and you'll find a section there that will include Khenpo. I believe it's on special events. So anyway, that's how you find him. And otherwise, you can email kpc@tara.org and ask. Someone will answer and tell you. Let's see. We have meditations Saturday and Sunday. That's in person here at KPC or online on YouTube. So it may also be on Facebook. I do not know. Anyway, let's go with YouTube and in person, Saturdays and Sundays at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Medicine Buddha, which is just on Facebook, and it is very short practice in English. Jetsunma condensed the practice on Amitabha, who is the Buddha that you would pray to if you were dying. And I'm sorry, this is not Amitabha, this is Medicine Buddha. So let's go back to Medicine Buddha. Medicine Buddha basically made all these prayers to help beings in sickness or in death. And so that he's the guy. Somebody's dying, somebody's sick, somebody's anything. You can pray to him and get results. And these are condensed. They're in English every evening at 7 p.m. on Facebook, and it only runs about 15 or 20 minutes at the most. It's a relaxed kind of practice, and everyone gets to put in their prayer requests. So in addition, daily we have a soak offering, which is a food offering ceremony. It is every day of the week at different times each day. Today it will be at 4 p.m. and I believe it will be across the street. So, and it is generally on Zoom. So, or in person, come. The statue across the street is beautiful, and it's just right off River Road. You could just pull up out front, park on River Road, and walk up the steps. So come and join us. In addition to just traditional Buddhist practices, we have a drum circle live at Guru Rinpoche statue 3 days a week, Sundays at 11:30 in the morning, Mondays at 6:30 p.m., and Tuesdays at 6 p.m. So there's lots of other things that happen here. Buddhist relief is a big one. That's where Jetsunma is spending a lot of energy and time in getting as much food and support to those who are in need. And it's gotten into quite a large thing where everybody we were actually getting, over a ton or two of food to various organizations each week. And it takes up a large period of time and a lot of volunteers to source that food, to purchase the food. We have people shopping, we have people, out there drying the food to various distribution points. And so we're part of a chain, like the supply chain to these different organizations. And it's been a pretty wonderful experience. So come and join us. It's quite impressive and a lot of joy to see, how much just helping people can do. And truly, if you can't feed people and get them, comfortable in their life, they're not going to practice Dharma. That's for sure. They can't. They don't have time. They're busy scrambling for everything. So this is, just as much a Dharma practice, caring for others. It's even more than, a lot. So anyway, come join us. If you want to make an offering to Jetsunma, having received a teaching from her, you can do that on her PayPal account, which is jetsumagift@gmail.com. And that's also in the chat. So thanks for coming. Hope you come again. And hope you come in person. The temple is open from dawn to dusk. Outside is from dawn to dusk, and inside the prayer room from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So there we go. So that's what I have to say, and I hope to see you in person sometime soon. Thank you so much.